Hi everyone, my name is Lenny Stewart, and this is a video where I talk a little bit about, or I want to talk a bit about a recent map project that I did, and that was a map of Mobius, which is the Sonic universe. It's done from the Sonic the Hedgehog Encyclopedia, the 2012 issue of the encyclopedia, which in the back has a nice sort of map of Mobius on it, and I essentially redrew the entire thing, and I redrew it, and I placed all of the continents, all noted continents, and all the right sort of separations as accurately as I could. And also, I noted some of the cities on it too. Not all of the cities, only the important cities, only the major cities on it, which I did. And mostly because I want to be able to sort of spend a bit of time talking about how the map and some of the more important cities sort of relate to the history of the Sonic universe, history of Mobius as a place. Um, I guess the first thing maybe to go over is that Mobius is Earth. So the Sonic universe is Earth. In about the 33rd century, about the Sonic the Hedgehog sort of takes place, and most of the things takes place between the 32nd and 33rd century, which is well over 1,000 years after essentially Earth is around. And I guess is one of the reasons I kind of like the map, the way Mobius is constructed, is because you see sort of these similar shapes and forms, but you can see there's a lot of sort of geographical change, geological change that happens in the maps. And I think that's actually really cool. That's actually one of the reasons I like it. But I guess the first thing I want to go over though is the center area here. Let's zoom into that. There we go. The first thing I want to go over is the central area here, which is the Central Ocean. And if you zoom out a bit, you would notice that what you would probably be able to sort of tell out all the major continents as they relate to us now. So this would be North America, this would be South America, this would be Africa, quote unquote. This would be sort of Western Europe, essentially. And the Central Ocean is what is essentially the Atlantic Ocean, right? What used to be the ocean that would separate North America and Europe. This very, very large ocean has now really shrinked, right? It's very, very small. Small enough that a lot of the cities which border on the various different continents are actually very, very, very close to each other. They're not very far from each other at all. And this is kind of interesting too, because what used to be such a big gap that would create such big gaps, big sort of cultural gaps, right? At different areas between what North America and what Europe is. They're not very close to each other. A lot of the cities in different continents are very, very easy to access with each other. And we can imagine how much that would sort of, in some ways, sort of eliminate any real sense of, uh, you know, cultural stratification between different people, different continents and cities, across continents, right? The whole idea of a continent starts to lose a little bit of its strength, right? When these places are so close together. I mean, if we search it in a bit, the distance between something like the Mobian jungle, which is essentially Florida, or there's the Mobian jungle in Station Square City, is probably estimated to be the distance between New York City and Florida, which isn't that bad considering it's between North and South America, right? That's pretty good. That's pretty alright with it. And I guess the thing about it is that noting, sort of trusting me that these are all the most important cities, it's very, very telling that a lot of the major cities, a lot of the more important cities, are centered around this particular circle here, right? We would imagine that they would probably be very useful for things like communications, things like trade, and also we would imagine it's very important because a lot of the city, and this is what I like too, which is that a lot of the cities are noted to be sort of across this equator line here, right? Kind of between the equator, and it would make a lot of sense, I think, and it would actually be really neat that a lot of the cities are centered around the equator, because the equator is kind of an important part of the planet. It's an important part of Earth, and it's also an important part of Mobius as well, right? The equator is, I mean, if you watch enough nature channels, you'd probably be able to guess that the equator is a pretty important part, because essentially where life happens, right? Some of the most flourishing and diverse areas of life are usually closer to the equator, right? The equator is essentially, a very important part, right? Because it's temperate. It doesn't switch temperatures too much, right? It's generally quite consistent. It's hot, right? So lots of life gets to flourish around the equator, and it. I really like the implication that a lot of cities would essentially want to be around the equator, and that Mobius, after the ending of Earth, essentially Earth as we know it, that new kinds of life and new societies will essentially start to spring around the equator. The equator is where you want to be, usually, and the further from the equator you go, the harder it is for you, right? The more difficult it probably is for you to get somewhere. I mean, I guess it would still retain on some level that a city wants to be close to water. Like a big city, you want to be close to some kind of coast, right? I mean, they don't really need that now because we have lots of highways built and lots of distribution transport. But obviously before, transportation vehicles, people use boats, right? And you would want to have a city as close to the water so you could ship things out. So and these kind of things, I have to think, still hold true, even in different parts of it. So actually, one thing probably we'll note too is that it kind of holds true to its fiction, to the fiction of Sonic, that the further from the equator you go, the more fucked up you tend to get. I mean, Samplas City is essentially a desert area. You don't want to live in Samplas City, right? I mean, if you're if you're actually, we should probably talk about that later, about what's like a good place to live in Mobius ways, and then we'll find out that a lot of places in Mobius are very bad. A lot of them, there are a lot of places in Mobius you probably don't want to be living in. But let's focus on North Hammer first, which is essentially North America, because thinking about how close to the equator we want to be. Hold on, let me pause this. Yeah. So thinking a bit about how close to the equator that we want to be, it would help us sort of think about the relationship between Mobians and Overlanders, who were essentially quote unquote devolved humans after humans were essentially essentially killed off. I mean that's probably, I don't really need a use for them. They're essentially killed off, or I guess sort of systematically devolved by some mysterious alien ways, or I guess by a war by other countries. I mean, as soon as I understand it, the moment within a very small time frame that humans as we know them came in contact with extra life forces, they were wiped out. And humans were systematically devolved by what were called gene bombs in turn, and the ones who are left are called Overlanders because they're noted as devolved humans, although there's no real evidence that Overlanders are any less intelligent than the average Mobian. In fact, it's actually quite noted that Overlanders are actually very good, competent military strategists. But either way, I think North Hammer probably illustrates a really good sort of probably illustrates the very tense and weird relationship. I guess it would illustrate, how Mobius as a whole is constantly just plagued with conflict everywhere, but also the very tense relationship at a very particular time around the year 3220 between the Mobians and, or essentially the new humans, right? They're essentially humans basically. So I didn't note all the cities on what is essentially sort of South North Hammer on this map. I guess you take a look at it and you would figure that what you're essentially seeing is, I guess you're seeing the east coast of North America, I guess sort of mostly the United States, sort of going into the North American Midwest, and then just sort of cutting off. This actually is a river. If you have a copy of this encyclopedia, it doesn't really look like, I mean, if you search it on the internet, it looks like a line, but if you have the print copy of it, you look very close and realize it's actually a river. So it's actually a land mass cut off here between this area. But essentially because, the map is very large, the type is very large, I couldn't put every city on it, but it's worth noting that Neotropolis is right here, and Robotropolis, which is essentially sort of Dr. Robotnik's stronghold, right? The Eggman Empire's stronghold is right next to it. It's right west of it. It's like over here or so. And then Megapolis, which was essentially what used to be an Overlander stronghold, is sort of up here. There are no Overlander cities further south than Megapolis, right? I mean, let's bring this out so I can illustrate this. Megapolis is the furthest south Overlander city you get, and then as you get further north of North Hammer, it's not really mapped. In fact, actually, a lot of Mobius, outside of the equator isn't mapped. A lot of this area isn't mapped. A lot of this area isn't mapped. Hold on, is it? Yeah, okay. Yeah, a lot of this area here isn't really mapped. And parts of Africa aren't mapped either. Right, so you would imagine that Overlanders are essentially, you imagine that Overlanders are essentially after the Great War, which is a very, very large conflict between Mobians and Overlanders in South Northammer, which essentially crushes the Overlander population. Are essentially pushed further north, right? They're essentially pushed very far north. They can't seem to go anywhere. And then we would imagine that their society, this new human society, essentially deteriorates over time, right? Because they can't go anywhere. New Megapolis is the furthest south they can go, and even then, that's how they started war, right? They're essentially warring with New Metropolis constantly after 3220, even probably before 3220 as well. 3220, I would imagine that 3220, where King Frederick's son is killed, is murdered, or at least I'm pretty sure it was King Frederick's son was murdered. It was probably just a spark of probably just long held tensions, right? Because they're so close together and they're so different places, And also Megapolis, of course, Overlanders are known or understood as probably using a lot more fossil fuels, right? More sort of assertive kind of energy extractions that Mobians don't like, right? So essentially, this is also a geopolitics issue, issue of land, issue of energy, right? We're gonna, figure out that a lot of Mobius's politics is a politics of energy, right? It's a politics of who has energy, who is able to power themselves, right? Who is able to power other things. But yeah, so south of that, it's worrying. Essentially, if you want to be safe in an overland, you're essentially just being pushed further north. You can't be around the equator, unless you can get to this island here, Westopolis and Central City, and that's after what was essentially a closeted a sheltered human population, essentially started to grow out of Station Square City. So you have to essentially be lucky enough to be around when Westopolis and Central City is existing. If you're not, then you're essentially stuck. If you are, then you have to go through a lot of places, right, to be able to get to somewhere like there. And of course, anywhere you go south, people, if you find Mobians, they will essentially kill you on sight. There's no reason for them not to. So, although King Frederick of the Acorn Monarch is known for, I guess, issuing a nice sense, a very memorable sense of mercy towards what is his name, Nate Morgan, who is a scientist who developed the Power Ring, which you play in your little Sonic games. So yeah, I guess the thing is, and I guess that's why they're called Overlanders, because they're essentially, very, very far up north. Yeah, there's not much. It's just, and I guess that must be the reason. I guess it probably explains a lot of it, of the sort of deterioration of the society. They're essentially stuck very far upwards. I would imagine that there are probably more Overlanders living in North Europe. There's a lot more land to be able to spread somewhere, except in Northammer, where you're essentially just being, clawed in, and any time you want to push territory, they're probably Mobians. They're probably to push it back. So that's Northammer for the most part. Northammer is a pretty good place. New Metropolis obviously is the place where Sonic happens, like the Sonic comic books, Archie Sonic comic books mostly happen. It's worth noting too. So if we go to Yurish, let's see. All right, we should probably actually talk about the United Federation a bit when we talk about this. So the United Federation is essentially, like, we can think of maybe it's not in terms of countries, but in terms of these like sort of institutional governments that kind of lay claim to a lot of particular city states and lands, right? It's a very weird and interesting political system, right? And United Federation, as far as I understand, is actually grown out of Station Square City, and then Station Square City essentially moves on to this pretty convenient plot of land here, where there's Westopolis or Central City. I'm pretty sure there's a city over here as well, and there's Liana, which is of course the Sonic 06 games take place in. So we can see that the United Federation, which is essentially sort of a federation of mostly humans, starts spreading east, right? How far east they could spread, only time will tell, and how they could spread at all, also time will tell as well, because not long after Sonic and the Freedom Fighters find Station Square City, essentially the humans are introduced to Mobians again, and then the humans start spreading. They start actually creating, the humans start building land, start building cities from Station Square City again. Station Square is destroyed, as you probably played if you played the Sonic Adventure game. Station Square City is basically annihilated, and then not long after, Westopolis is also annihilated, or at least is invaded, by the Black Mass, the Black Aliens they're called, which is a terrible fucking name, really just poorly thought out. But Wessopolis is also invaded very quickly. So, I mean, not long after the United Federation starts spreading into cities, and then Central City, which, I mean, I always assumed was where Sonic Adventure 2 takes place, is essentially, there are lots of implications in that game that Central City is just completely broken apart. It's just like the infrastructure is just falling apart, and there are a lot of implications that a lot of that has to do with the United Federation, which is implied honestly to be more of a military, like, more of a sort of a military institution than a real governmental institution. Is essentially ravaged by military expansionism within the city itself, right? I mean, it's kind of scary playing Sonic Adventure 2 and seeing all these giant robots and drones flying everywhere, shooting shit at you, and airplanes is bombing you. Like this is one city and all this shit is happening. It's pretty clear to tell that the United Federation as a government institution probably has some issues, right, with the way in which it handles, the way the military is sort of flowed into society, and then of course that makes you wonder, what happens to Liana and how far east they can spread after that, if they can spread at all. I would imagine that after Shadow the Hedgehog, United Federation essentially dissolves. I mean, two of their biggest cities are completely destroyed. Whether they can rebuild or not doesn't depend on money. It depends on their energy. It depends on how much energy they have. It depends on how they can access power rings, right? Power rings is ultimate sort of energy, right? Chaos Emerald, infinite sources of energy. They can get those. They could probably rebuild somewhat quickly. But energy doesn't give you food, right? Energy doesn't give you water, right? Like these are things that energy can't sort of can't do for you. So there isn't really much. I don't think there's much hope for the United Federation, which is probably fine because I don't think they're a very good government institution anyways. But yeah, Soliana is probably the furthest east that matters. I mean, I'm sure there are some UF stations. I'm pretty sure there are some UF stationary little areas further in Eurasia, but Soliana is the furthest east city that really matters. And Soliana is very different from the other cities too. It's a very European city. Oh god, which is so weird, isn't it? It's like it's very stonish, right? It looks like an old Italian city. It looks like it's very different culturally, and it's probably because it's further mass inland. It's not really close to any of the other cities. How far Soliana lasts also depends on things. Soliana never comes off as a place. It comes off as more sort of the equivalent of like how Rome is, right? It's sort of a symbolic city more than a place in which people conduct trade or commerce happens, right? So whatever happens in UF, I have no idea. Let's move even further. East. Let's make sure. Am I recording? Yeah, okay, good. Let's go further east into what is essentially Eurasia and Eurasia. Now, on the encyclopedia, they're noted as the same place, right? As in, they're noted as the same landmass because they're colored the same. But I noted them as two different areas with the same color, essentially because they're kind of different areas, right? I mean, it's the further east that you move, you start to enter, of course, the quote-unquote four houses, right? The more eastern areas. What is I'm pretty sure called the Iron Kingdom, run by Monkey Kong, depending on which issue the Sonic comics you read. It's either Monkey Kong or it's either the Iron Queen who takes over, essentially sort of exiles Monkey Kong, and Monkey Kong tries to come back and he tries to take it over because he's Monkey Kong. Essentially, when you push further east, you essentially find the eastern cities, right? And I think that's usually what separates Eurasia from Eurasia. There are a lot of little areas here. I don't find a lot of them particularly important, except the Iron Fortress, which you would imagine would probably be the most important area in the Iron Kingdom, the Stormtroop Village, which is probably another part of those four houses. The four houses essentially, as far as I understand it, just four different particular sort of jurisdictions. It's so weird because what a government institution has nothing to do with its landmass. Actually, that is a great. That's a great segue. Let's open up a bit. And let's go a bit downward over here let's go about here to down under. Let's go here. There we go. You can see a little of the coastline drawn on it. I go over it. Seeing how this thing is built. Here we go. So Priscilla is noted as the only city on Down Under Now, what we would imagine is that Priscilla is. We don't know. I've never seen Priscilla in any of the comics, but I would note that Priscilla is probably a result of the Acorn Monarch's attempt to build some kind of settlement in Down Under, and we would and this is of course under King Sebastian, and another king who came before him who essentially started to they would sort of survey Down Under, and then it would basically King Sebastian who would actually make some real assertions there, start really building something there. And we can I think it's pretty easy to conjecture that they probably failed at least in some level. There's never really any signs when you see Down Under, when you read about Down Under, that anyone there even recognized the Acorn Monarch at all, recognizes them as an important part. You know, and you know, if the Acorn Monarch has failed to make any society there, they're essentially, you know, failing after the Echidnas failed before them. The Echidnas used to live in Echidnopolis, which is essentially right here. The Great Crater, this little shape here, is essentially Angel Island. You know, the Echidnas, who probably, I guess, like the oldest civilized Mobian society, built their first, you know, area down under. But then they had to shoot it into the sky because a comet was about to blow it up. So, but actually, probably more important than that, though, about the Echidnas failure to create a society is the Echidnas history of genetic terrorism, right? Of you know, genetic experimentation on Tasmanians, which is, you know, has very toxic, long-lasting effects on that area. So, I mean, no one has really, as far as I know, succeeded to make any real society Down Under. Down Under comes off to me as a very, maybe wild isn't the proper word. A sort of a free-for-all place, right? A place where there isn't a lot of civil society being constructed, right? Right. That it's very strange and what's the word? Yeah, it's a place where probably there isn't a lot of structure to it. There's not a political structure to it. It's probably kind of all over the place. It comes off as one of those areas particularly, and also when people see Down Under, like I've never seen a city in Down Under. When you read about the complex and Down Under, it always just comes off as just a bunch of forest everywhere, like just everyone just living in whatever particular tiny settlement there are. So there isn't really any large political structure there. No one has really ever succeeded to do that, which is also particularly strange. Let's go a bit west now. Let's go into the Great South Ocean, which is obviously pretty clearly the biggest ocean in Mobius. It's pretty much the largest one. I mean, and it's not even that large, to be honest. I mean, at least comparison to Earth. So, you know, or I guess to Mobius 1,000 years ago, or more than 1,000 years ago. So Mobius doesn't have very big oceans in it, which is also very interesting. And there's what is called the Mob Ocean, which is essentially the Pacific Ocean, in which, because, you know, crosses over to the other side of the planet. I didn't note it because it would look very ugly, but the Mob Ocean also is here too, you know. So the Mob Ocean kind of stretches across. But yeah, the Great South Ocean is probably the biggest ocean on the side. I'm not particularly sure what use it is, but it's kind of nice that it's there. And what else? Oh, right. The earlier question, which I want to ask about, where is the best place to live in Mobius? Oh, actually, I should probably know the tundras too. So there's the South and North Tundra, which aren't really desolate. I mean, Nate Morgan, who invented the Power Ring, is known to have lived in the tundra. Just a little castle for himself there. The tundra seems to be a place where, you know, political and cultural outcasts go to build something for themselves. So it's definitely a place where you could live. The tundra isn't noted as being very icy. It's noted as being very like sort of lots of snow there. So it doesn't seem that bad, to be honest. You can imagine that probably because it's a lot warm. Mobius is a lot warmer, generally a lot warmer. The degree of Mobius is probably much warmer than Earth for obvious reasons. And the only city I noted on is Iceborough is the only one that sounded like a city, so I figure it's some kind of important capital. And of course the Frozen Sea, whether the Frozen Sea stops at the North and North Hammer is very weird, and I don't really know if it's true or not, or if that's accurate or not. I'm pretty sure it keeps going. I'm pretty sure I just didn't do a particularly good job sort of lowering it, but it's probably for interpretation because even the prints aren't really that detailed. This is much more detailed than the actual encyclopedia prints. Encyclopedia print isn't very detailed at all. So what is the best place to live in Mobius? If you're in Mobius, or if you're a Mobian, where do you want to go? to survive, because Mobius is a very dangerous place. It's a place with a very, very loose sense of political structure and civil structure. There aren't a lot of actual cities with rules and stuff. You're mostly just kind of living on your own, just kind of fending for yourself. Oh yeah, that's what I wanted to say. Down Under is kind of like you're sort of fending for yourself. Everyone's just kind of, but yeah, you're essentially sort of fending for yourself. There isn't a lot, there isn't a lot of safety in Mobius. There's not a lot of safety guaranteed for you. So what's the best place to live in? Well, if you're living in New Metropolis, hold on, let me make sure I note that, because it's probably a bit annoying to have. Yeah. There we go. There we go. Perfect. All right. So, let's move there. Oh, jeez. Yeah, so, I mean, if you're living in Ubo Metropolis, pretty much any time after 3220, you're essentially in war with somebody, right? I mean, Ubo Metropolis is so close to Megapolis. They're right next to each other. I mean, just like constant conflict anytime you just leave the area, anytime you leave the city, you just, go a bit further north, there's a problem. And that's essentially, so you're essentially in war there. After essentially the creation of Robotropolis, right? The Robotnik sort of takes over what was old Robotropolis during the Great War, and then he turns into Robotropolis. And then of course a lot of the Mobians live in what was called Knothole Village, and then they essentially, over time, with the help of Nicole, who's like an AI technology, who essentially actually becomes sort of anthropomorphized in the later issues. They build new Robotropolis, which is over here, right? And that's essentially where all sort of the newer issues take place. So, if you're in New Robotropolis, you're essentially warring with, or if you're in Knothole Village, I guess, which is sort of generally in the same area, you're essentially warring with like this, very scary robot stronghold that is just west of you. So there isn't really a lot for you there. Like I said before, if you're in Sandblast City, you're in a desert. There probably isn't a lot of water for you there. Sandblast City is noted as having very little structure, being very violent, full of sandstorms and Robian attacks. Robians are, of course, formerly roboticized Mobians who actually have become very rabid, which is very scary. And there's a very, very scary issue of the Sonic Hedgehog cons, very early ones, where Sonic and Tails are escaping Sandblast City, and what is his name? He's a rabbit. Jack the rabbit is, with a eye patch, is chasing after them, and I'm pretty sure he's being chased by Robians. And he essentially is, something happens to him and the sand goes over and they leave, And then Sonic has a nightmare the next day about how he didn't save him. So Sandblast City is probably a very dangerous place to live, essentially. I mean you're essentially in California, Arkansas, New Mexico, sort of. There isn't a lot really for you there, and it's hard to get anywhere. Ferville seems like a pretty safe place, so I've seen Ferville get invaded before. Ferville is a bit over here. There's a Mobian jungle out here. I mean, if you're a Mobian, you're probably more likely to be living not in a city than in a city. Anyways, so it probably isn't too bad. There's Liang West, which I don't really know too much about, although I do know that Liang West was the center of a lot of early experiments of robotization by Dr. Robotnik, by the Robotnik Empire. So Liang West also has its trouble if you're in a particular very, wrong time or place, right? Let's go for the south. There were some really nice sounding cities that sound like nice places, like Vesuvio and I guess Karma over there. I don't know too much about those places though. So Northammer is just constantly ravaged by war, is what I'm trying to say. Going there. Potentially Westopolis don't seem like stable places to live, even though they're built kind of like cities. They look like New York City or some average fucking gray American city. They don't have a lot of political sort of stability. And then it seems kind of like the safe place to be would be Nottingham. Nottingham is a terrible name for an area, but it's a fantasy lore. So, and probably Deerwood Forest. If you're living in a very particular sort of time, actually, make sure. Yes, I do. Give me a second to get this right. I have the book in front of me, and I can take a bit of a look. at exactly what time. Here we go. Oh, it was King. Yep. So, if you're living sort of after King Sebastian installs a ruler, he essentially installs a ruler, which is a very American empire thing to do. To essentially just go to a place and basically just, just kill who needs to be killed and just place in whatever ruler you want. And he essentially installs a leader into the O'Hedge family, which Amy is related to. And he ends the power struggle in Mercia, which is essentially these two places in this sort of general area. It's not Albion. Albion is very different. It's these areas here. So if you live after that, and if you live before the Robotnik Empire takes over, and then the sort of new sort of interim ruler, sort of Robotnik Empire, lower gruntish kind of new ruler of Mercia. Ruler is a real word because it's not formal. He essentially just takes it over and he just kind of installs himself. And if you're if you live between those times, you're probably in a pretty good place of political stability. It takes a lot of violence to get to a place where you have a ruler installed, but you're probably doing pretty okay. If you're living before then, Mercia is noted to have a power struggle before Sebastian is ruler of the Acorn Empire. And we would imagine that given that Nottingham is clearly some kind of stereotype of England, that Mercia has we would imagine Mercia has a very feudalist structure, which means that essentially they're just houses, right? There's sort of these particular kind of houses, sort of not really states, but just these sort of jurisdictions, and they're all kind of vying for power, which was essentially what 14th and 13th century Europe was anyways. So if you're in then, you're probably not doing too well. If you're there after the Robotnik Empire comes in, you're probably not doing too well. You're probably in some trouble. Although it's noted that the new ruler of Mercia is like a snake. He's I don't remember what his name is, but he's essentially defeated. He's defeated by Robbo Hedge, the smart talking Robbo Hedge. He's defeated by him, and and Robbo Hedge becomes the new king of Mercia. So after that, you would think that you would do pretty well as well. So it seems like Nottingham is probably the place you want to be if you want political stability, if you want safety, if you want to live in a civil society. That's probably where you actually want to be in. Is Nottingham, and essentially the Deersford area. I don't really know anything. I don't know too much about. I'm trying to look through here, see if there's something about. I guess not. Yeah. So, it's probably a nice place. If you're living in any of the four particular jurisdictions in the eastern places in the Iron Kingdom, you're probably doing okay. If you live there before the Iron Queen takes over, and the Iron Queen is noted to be a very vicious human being, so and if you're a Mobian of an Arctic race, like a seal or something, Tundra probably isn't so bad. You live on Angel Island, which would seem okay because the Echidnas are a very particular race because they've been around for a very long time. They're noted as being very advanced, right, technologically advanced, but they go through a lot of wars, and they have a lot of rich history too. But they go through all these wars and they go through all these conflicts, very vicious conflicts, and their own toying with technology usually just kind of means that more of them are killed in a war. Essentially, it doesn't really help them in a lot of ways. So Angel Island is kind of a mixed bag a bit, especially if you're part of the Dark Legion. That's also not a good thing as well. And the thing about being part of Dark Legion, which essentially is sort of a weird sort of cult built out of this big split in Echidna society, very, very early Echidna society. You can't really change that for the most part. If you're born into a Dark Legion family tree, they're basically in Dark Legion family tree. There's not much you could do about that. So we're essentially part of a very dark history. So Angel Island is kind of weird. And then Echidnopolis, which is I'm pretty sure like a big city in Angel Island, essentially wiped out. It's wiped out by sort of this particular line of what is called Enerjack, which is every person there was a quote-unquote new Enerjack. Enerjack was just the name, sort of a pseudonym of scientists who use chaos energy to essentially make himself extremely powerful. And it is noted that one of the people who have sort of fall in that line of quote unquote interjects. Essentially wiped out Econopolis. So so if you're kind of so if you're in Asian Island, not too great either usually. If you're an overlander again, you're probably stuck up north. It's probably very cold. It probably isn't a lot for you to go to. You're probably very isolated. So I assume being an overlander is pretty miserable. Not much knows about being Africa though. Seems okay. But yeah, that's Mobius sucks. It's kind of bad. Whether it's better than Earth now or worse, so you decide based on what I just said. That pretty much concludes my little survey of this map. We went to this little project that I did. If you'd like to download the map, there's very high resolution version of the map you can find in the link, which I'm probably going to put in the description of this video. That ends it for now. Is there anything else you want to know? No, that's pretty much it. Alright, that's good. Thank you for watching. Thank you for watching this video. I haven't made a video in a long time. It's pretty fun. I'm probably doing another Sonic related video soon. I'm playing something I really like, and I'll probably talk about it a bit. But for now, thank you for watching. Have a nice evening.